In today's Farm Report, the battle over the renewable fuel standard continues, with the American Petroleum Institute asking for the rule to be repealed, and members of the renewable fuel community are at odds over how the system should be reformed. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
The American Petroleum Institute strengthened its call to repeal or reform the renewable fuel standard this week, calling it unworkable and renewing food versus fuel arguments that National Corn Growers Association First Vice President Rob Elliott says are obviously incorrect.
The whole problem with the food versus fuel myth is that it's been around for years and it's never come true. Corn prices are now below cost of production and near half of where they once were, and so obviously food prices haven't followed a similar path.
Growth Energy CEO Tom Bias thinks the oil industry is getting concerned about increased support for the RFS.
This past weekend, we saw a significant development in Iowa when 6 out of the 9 Republican presidential candidates that came to the Ag Summit expressed support for the RFS. I think more and more politicians see the misinformation that's being passed out, and that's probably bothering it.
There was also another call to reform the RFS that came from an unlikely source this week. In a speech on Wednesday, the president of the Advanced Biofuels Association proposed reopening the RFS to make changes favorable to next-generation biofuels, such as setting a minimum RIN value for cellulosic fuels, extending the program beyond 2022, and removing a loophole that allows the oil industry to opt out from buying cellulosic gallons. Renewable Fuels Association President Bob Dineen questioned why ABFA would make such a proposal.
All they are doing is throwing more uncertainty into the process by calling for legislative action when the legislation isn't needed. There's nothing that ABFA has identified as needed improvements to the program that the agency already does not have the authority to address, and the agency needs to do that. But adding more uncertainty into the process hurts the development of next-generation biofuels. It doesn't help it.
ABFA claims to have a membership of over 30 companies in the advanced and cellulosic industries, but Novozymes President Adam Monroe says it's not everyone.
The Advanced Biofuels Association does not represent, I would argue, not even the majority of the advanced biofuels producers, and certainly not many of the ones we work with. And so I don't believe that position is necessarily representative of the advanced industry as a whole. Secondly, I just don't think it's a matter of fixing what isn't broken. That's really not where the issue is. It's the politics that are broken, not the legislation.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture last week announced a moratorium on new animal research projects conducted at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska that will remain in place until new procedures ensuring greater accountability for animal welfare are fully implemented. The moratorium was announced at the same time that the draft results of a review that was ordered by Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack following a New York Times story, and the review faulted the committee charged with overseeing animal care with failing to properly oversee those operations and other administrative shortcomings. The House Judiciary Committee last week passed the Legal Workforce Act and now goes to the full House, and it mandates E-Verify, an internet-based way for employers to check the eligibility of their employees, and that's raised some concerns from ag groups when it comes to undocumented workers. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
The House Judiciary Committee last week passed the Legal Workforce Act, which mandates E-Verify, and agricultural groups have concerns about the bill as a standalone measure. American Farm Bureau labor specialist Christy Boswell says they can support E-Verify if two conditions are met.
We advocate for a work authorization for those workers. Upwards of 70% of that workforce is unauthorized currently, so you just can't pass the E-Verify muster. Secondly, we advocate for a new guest worker program that's administered by USDA that provides needs for our year-round workforce and our seasonal workforce and much more flexible options for the employers and the workers.
California Farm Bureau President Paul Wenger says the fresh produce industry needs more than just E-Verify.
We're very glad to see that some of our Republican congressmen have laid down the line that no, you cannot have an E-Verify program without some kind of a legal workforce path so that people can get a legal workforce. We're not talking about a pathway to citizenship. We're just talking about legal documentation that they can get so that they don't have to be concerned about deportation, or those that are in Mexico now that want to work here and take jobs that our domestic workforce will not, do, that they can come here and work and go home again. And so we think it's going to be a clean bill. They are pushing for E-Verify, mandatory E-Verify. Mandatory E-Verify without a workable and effective guest worker program. It would be a disaster for California agriculture, not to mention most of Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Florida, Texas, a lot of those coastal states that have a lot more of the seasonal fresh fruits and vegetables.
Reese Langley with the National Cotton Council agrees with the shortcomings of the E-Verify plan, but expects it will not make it to the floor of the House.
It does not provide or address in any way the current workforce and labor that's in place now for agriculture, and making sure that those workers have a path to continue into the legal workforce. While it did move through the House Judiciary Committee, it does not sound likely that that bill will get a vote on the House floor, certainly not as a standalone piece of legislation. So at this point, we don't anticipate that moving forward in the legislative process, but it is something that we'll continue to monitor closely over the course of this year.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
With more of us demanding more fruits, vegetables, nuts, and nursery products, more research is needed to assure there'll be plenty of specialty crop goods for us consumers. To that end, USDA recently announced funding for grants under its Specialty Crop Research Initiative. This is the director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Sunny Ramaswamy.
Has been an outstanding program that has helped the community, the producers, farmers that do raise such crops, in addressing their production practices, in addressing their processing practices, food safety issues, whether they've got constraints such as insect problems or pathogen problems or weed problems, irrigation issues, marketing issues, on and on and on.
$55 million in grants are available to land-grant universities and other research institutions working together to develop science-based tools for the specialty crop industry. There is also an additional $25 million made available for study on citrus disease and how to improve citrus health. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The economic impact of the H5N2 virus has started to impact the poultry industry. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
With high pathogenic avian influenza now confirmed in a commercial turkey flock in one of the top poultry-producing states, more countries are banning imports from the United States. And Kansas State University economist Dr. Glenn Tonsor says the economic impact is starting to be felt.
Those poultry products that were destined for a given country that can't go there now, whether it's for just the next week or if it's for a longer duration, yet to be determined, they will go to a alternative market, a second best market. And in some cases, that will be a different foreign destination, so a country that hasn't made an announcement. In other cases, it will stay here domestically. In either case, those pounds are going to a second best market. Otherwise, they would have been going there to start with. So they tend to go there with a lower price, lower transaction point than we had before. Before all these announcements, we were in the midst of notable expansion of poultry production in particular. So you've already got some, downward pressure on prices that's coming from additional supplies, and we're adding to that this international demand challenge that's following these AI announcements, both of which have been putting some downward pressure on prices.
Arkansas became the 7th state last week to have a confirmed case of the high path AI. Missouri was the 6th. Missouri Director of Agriculture Richard Fordyce says they began working with USDA after the disease was confirmed in 2 separate turkey facilities in different parts of the state.
We immediately mobilized, the resources of Missouri Department of Agriculture in cooperation and conjunction with USDA and, frankly, the industry. We're addressing it in a very active role. So we did have a confirmed case in Jasper County. We just had a confirmed case in Montauk County. So far, those are the 2 places that we do have confirmed H5N2. We're taking test samples from other operations around those areas. All of those tests at this point have come back negative. So we know that operations still producing turkeys do not have the virus. It is safe. So we think we've got a good handle on it. These protocols and the rapid response kind of the guidebook that we go by when these kind of things happen. Those kind of responses were developed, over time, and they seem to demonstrate the best outcome that we could ask for.
Outbreaks of the HiPath AI started with a single backyard flock in Oregon confirmed in December of 2014. Since January, it has been found in backyard flocks in Washington and Idaho as well, and commercial flocks in California and Minnesota. Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
It's your chance to comment on a new Farm Bill conservation program. As Jessica Groves of USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service explains about the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program.
The creation of the new consolidated program included a transition from those existing programs, but it also included some new provisions,
which led to creation of a new rule to oversee ASEP. The rule published last month in the Federal Register. Public comment on this interim final rule is being accepted through April 28th. Grove says the Wetlands Reserve Program, Farm and Ranch Protection Program, and Grasslands Reserve Program will all now merge into ASEP.
The combining of those three former easement programs into a new program required a new rule to be put forth to address the changes from the original programs, as well as to go ahead and make that consolidation of those three programs.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.